Welcome to the Leader to Leader podcast brought to you by the StarQuest Group. I'm your host, Tom Athenour, and today I'm excited to introduce you to my guest, Gordy Curphy. Gordy is an author, an organizational psychologist, and consultant who has worked with over 20,000 leaders from around the world. He's worked with over 5,000 teams and had more than 600 executive and senior team engagements. He has also held leadership roles in the U.S. Air Force, a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, and has worked with the Blandin Foundation and also Personnel Decisions International. He has also led turnarounds and startups and organizational transformational shifts and strategies and global assignments. He's the author of 25 books, which I didn't know, and I've known him for a long time, including the best-selling textbook, Leadership, Enhancing the Lessons of Experience, which is in its 11th edition. He's also the mind and co-creator of the rocket model. He co-created that with Robert Hogan. And that model now is being used in organizations, large organizations, to help them build effective teams to be able to scale more effectively. Needless to say, Gordy is no stranger to developing leaders, and he has really a lot of experience around change management, organizational transformation, and particularly how to build and create high-performing teams, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm excited to dive into our conversation and let you meet my friend, Gordy. So, Gordy, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Tom. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's been a while, and it's fun to reconnect because we've known each other for a long time.
Yes, a lot of waters pass underneath that bridge. That is for sure.
Isn't that the truth? So, for our listeners out there, you have a rich history, got a lot of academic background, you've got military background, and then you've been in corporate space for a long time. Give us a little bit of background on you, and then what led you into the work that you're doing today, and specifically around teams, because that's what we're going to be zeroing in on.
Yeah. So I did my undergraduate work at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and I played ice hockey all 4 years when I was at the academy, and that really got me interested in leadership and teams. That experience, and then spent a career in the military where a lot of it was actually teaching at the Air Force Academy, where I was doing consulting to various agencies across the U.S. government, as well as teaching leadership at the academy and working with teams at the academy. Um, Took an early retirement from the military and then joined the private sector. Actually ran a consulting firm out of Denver, started it up and got it up and running, and then worked for the same company in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, where we really focused on leadership assessment, executive coaching, 360-degree feedback. As a matter of fact, the company I worked for invented the whole 360-degree process. And by the time I left, they were doing about 1 million 360s a year. And that was people actually taking the test. They were doing about 10 million surveys a year. Um, and then, did some work with teams there too. And then got to a point where I decided I was tired of making money for other people. So I said,
Totally
I
get that one. Yeah.
yeah, you can relate to that, Tom. I said,
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna start my own company and yeah, find a boss I like. So not that my other bosses were bad, but it's just like I'd rather work for myself. And I remember when I got out, I left this nice, vice president level role, and my parents were complaining about, well, we're on a fixed income. I don't know if we're going to be able to afford, what you're going to do, and what if you don't make it? And so you hear all this, you know,
Reasons not to, right?
yeah, it's like, because they grew up they're both born in the mid 30s, so it was like the job security
Sure.
was everything, and
Yeah.
my on the Hogan motive, values, and preferences scale, my security score is 0. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like, oh, if it doesn't work, I'll find something else to do. So, and then, since then, we've been doing, so it's both my wife and I are in business together. We both have PhDs in industrial organizational psychology from the University of Minnesota. and we have very, very similar careers. She actually worked at the Center for Creative Leadership down in Colorado Springs for a number of years. Then we both worked at the same company in Minneapolis for a number of years. And again, right now we're doing leadership assessments, executive coaching, leadership development, and doing a lot of work with teams.
Awesome. Great. So I've always had great respect for the work that you're doing because you bring that sort of the psychology side and the industrial side to then be, and you're very much of a practical, relevant, you are so zeroed in on what business needs out there. So you don't come across as an academic from what I've experienced in working together. So I've always appreciated that.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I always, in some sense, I tell folks I'm a recovering academic, because you've written 25 books, you kind of like stay with it to some extent. But I think a lot of the work that we do, I really see my role as being a translator. It's kind of like, all right, here's what we've learned about topic X, Y, or Z, and then here's what it means for people with real jobs. This is how you actually apply this. This is what you do with it,
Yes.
or this is the stuff that you really shouldn't pay attention to. It's more hype than reality. So I try to, help people improve their BS detectors and, come up with tools and techniques that are actually going to work.
Yeah, and that's what I've that's a great way to sort of describe how you take that and apply it and make it relevant to those that are out there actually doing the day to day. So
Yeah.
so beautiful. Well, the reason why I wanted, so your background is quite extensive, and we'll include a little bit of that in the show notes. But one of the reasons why I wanted to connect up with you today is that you started to move heavy and really focus in on team systems and working with teams around the world and have developed a team model. What led you into that? Because that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, a couple of things. And this was back, 25 years ago or so. And I remember just looking at the landscape then, and a lot of the focus was on the leader. We were trying to come up with leadership competency models, trying to describe, what leaders are supposed to do, how it changes as they go through different levels, or how the models might change across industries. And all the focus was on the leader. Um, One of the things that never got talked about was the team in which they operated. And to me, I just looked at these models and stuff and said, gosh, where's the team in any of this stuff? It's all focused on the leader. And not these different skills weren't important for a leader. They were important, but there was nothing really mentioned about this collection of people that leaders have to get work done through. And I was looking at what was out there, and what you found was that the team literature was very much like the leadership literature in that it doesn't cohere very well. Leadership literature, you'll read stuff about authentic leadership, and that sounds a little bit different than servant leadership, than situational leadership, than the contingency models, and transformational. You got all these different models out there, and it was the same with teams. And so I kind of said, okay, let's take a step back. What does the research tell us about teams? And then how do we package that up into a model that makes practical sense? So it's got this real strong research base behind it, but it says, here's what people who are leading teams, here's what you can really do with it, or here's how you can use it to diagnose what's going on with your team, or how to recognize, okay, my team's going south. What are the reasons? What are the underlying reasons for that? And then what potentially could I do to turn things around?
Okay, cool. So we're seeing, and we talked about that on the prep call yesterday, really a much more emphasis around team and teamwork and organizations really relying on teams driving the results. I've seen a shift in that in this 30 years I've been in it. Are you also seeing that as well as things have become more complex?
Yeah, yes, Tom. But to me, teams wax and wane. So back in the aughts, Lencioni's book came out, and everybody was talking about teams. And then things sort of fell to the wayside when we went through the financial crisis. And then they started getting much more popular again when COVID happened, because all of a sudden everybody was sort of co-located, and now everybody was working from home, and people were going, "Oh my God, how do we make this work? These people aren't, I'm not rubbing shoulders with these folks every day. How do I get them working effectively together?"
Yes.
And then on And then on top of that, as you said, Tom, things have just gotten a lot more complicated even after COVID with tariffs now, changes in administration, wars. There's just a lot more going on now, and you see companies restructuring, reshaping. You see teams being slammed together that didn't used to work together. You see new teams being added. So, and everybody kind of recognizing that it's not the heroic leaders anymore. It is this notion about, leadership being a team sport and getting people to work effectively together in order to make things happen.
That is so well said. And we are seeing the same things out there relative to the importance of how to, in fact, was on a call. It might have been you talking about how some organizations are using your team assessment to give feedback to the leader, the team leader, and they're using that as a way of succession planning, of really kind of
Mhm.
getting a sense on the capabilities of that leader to lead teams as being a critical
Yeah,
competency. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So one of the things we've done, and we'll probably talk about this later in the call, but
Yeah.
when we think about team building, a lot of times I think we think about it working with one team at a time. You were talking about before the call about working with this team in Kazakhstan, which is,
Yes.
sounded fascinating given and don't get me wrong, that's super powerful and that's really important. It's good for leaders and for facilitators to know, okay, how do I work with one team at a time? Where we have taken it because of Diane, my wife's background and and Tom, you play in this sandbox too, is we've looked at it much more from a talent management perspective. Rather than looking at it from one team at a time, how do we look at teams with respect to how do we assess leaders to see who can build teams and who can't? How do we onboard thinking about teams? How do we do succession planning thinking about teams? How do we train leaders how to build teams? Um, so we think about it much more from that perspective. And then what ends up happening is that those are the pathways by which large multinationals scale teamwork. So if you look at a large company like Target Corporation, you might have 400,000 people in the organization. You probably have 100,000 teams. Well, you really can't move the needle very much working one team at a time. You have to start thinking about teamwork very differently to say, okay, how do I scale this? If teamwork truly is a competitive advantage for us, and it really may not cost that much money to help get people working better together, how do I do that? How do I do that in a really cost-effective way?
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of that is captured in the concept of a team of teams, where you're looking at a multi cross-functional, cross-divisional
Yeah,
teams all having to work towards a common mission. And so it gets really complicated when you start to get at that level, that organizational level.
yeah,
So one of the things that I'd be curious around is we were talking about a case study. Sometimes on our podcast we do a case study, kind of what the situation was, what the problem or the issue was that you went in and addressed, and then what happened, and then kind of the outcomes on that. Let's kind of spend some time talking about that because you have one in particular you'd like to unpack.
yeah, yeah, sure. So maybe take a step back before we get there. Just maybe talk about what our team solution looks like, because there are
Okay,
some
good. Let's do
different
that.
com different components associated with that. And then we'll talk about how we applied them um, to the case study. So when we think about teams, the first thing we think about is we have a team model. It's called the rocket model. And the rocket model is really just designed to be a simple heuristic that describes most issues going on with the team and helps create a common language for leaders and consultants to build teams. Um, so, for example, the model consists of these 8 components, and at the bottom of the model, and it looks like a rocket, and at the bottom of the model, you've got this component called context, which is just what is the situation surrounding the team? Who are the team's customers? Who are its competitors? What's going on in terms of macroeconomic conditions? So it's really around the notion of, is everybody on the same page about the situation? Um, the next 2 components in the model, going up the model, are mission and talent. Mission is all about the team's why, what, and how. Why does this team exist? What does it need to get accomplished? How is it going to get these goals done? Talent is who's on the team, but it's also concerned with the number of people on the team, how they're organized, whether or not you got good team players or team killers, if people have clear roles and responsibilities. So there's more to the team than just the skills and capabilities of the people on the team.
Okay.
Those are the first three components, and those are foundational components. If you want to build a high-performing team, you got to get context, mission, and talent right. Next, once you've kind of worked on that, the next thing you work on are what we call norms and buy-in. Norms are the unwritten rules by which teams operate. So how do the team run its meetings? How does it make decisions? How does it communicate? What are the rules around accountability? Buy-in is the motivational component of the model. Are people willing to put forth the energy and effort necessary for the team to succeed? A lot of teams suffer from or have matrix structures, which makes first team loyalty really difficult. It's really hard to get buy-in when people are kind of got their time and energies directed to another team. The next part of the model is what we call resources and courage. So resources is, does the team have the budget, the data, the authority, the hardware, software, et cetera, for the team to succeed, to accomplish its goals. Courage component has to do with trust in psychological safety. Our line is polite teams get polite results. So many of the problems associated, particularly as you get more senior in the organization, the problem is usually not teams playing dysfunctional feud. The problem is teams being too nice. It's not like you're purposely trying to have team members be mean to each other, but you want to have some level of conflict in order to generate better solutions.
And you call that courage, being able
Yep.
to show up with that
Yep.
ability
Yep.
to address conflict
Yep.
effectively. Okay, good. Okay, super. Got
And
it.
then the last component in the model is results. Are we moving the needle? Are we getting better over time? Are we learning from our experience? That's the last component of the model. So once people understand the model, they can pretty much apply it to any team and figure out, okay, it looks like mission's missing here. It looks like norms are missing here. We're not doing well in terms of courage. You can pretty much figure out, once you understand the model, you can diagnose kind of any team and figure out what's going on there. And 98% of the problems on a team will fall into one or more of those components.
Okay, so let's kind of, before we get into the case study, I want to kind of review this thing because I think this is important. So the rocket, kind of think about that visually. So all of our listeners out there just listening in. So the rocket is kind of that structure, and the context is really surrounding the rocket. It really
Yep.
is the context of the situation. Then within that base level, sort of where the ignition is, if you will, to propel upwards, is this mission and talent. And then from there, the next level's up norms and buy-in. Are people engaged? Are they really kind of bought off on the motivation and are motivated to accomplish the mission? Resources, courage, and results. Okay, so results is being kind of the tip of that rocket. If you visualize that particular sort of model.
Yeah, if you think about SpaceX, it's almost as if, you've got here's a scenario in which this rocket is, it's on Cape Canaveral, it's over in Texas. Here's a situation, good weather, bad weather, whatever the case may be. Then you got the first stage, the second stage, the third stage, and you got the payload, which is the results.
Okay, perfect. That's a good way to describe it. Beautiful.
Yep.
Okay, super. So is there one in particular? So if I'm a leader, I'm going to start to think as part of those components that I'm going to be putting together if I take over a new team or evaluating the team that I currently lead. Okay, so I've got that set. You want to jump into the case study, or do you want to kind of just unpack this?
Well, the other thing I would say about that, Tom, so there's sort of three components in our solution. So one is the model, and what the model does is create a common language for building teams. So everybody, when you go to Red Bull, everybody knows what the model is. Everybody knows here's the rocket model. Here's how we build teams. But there's not a whole lot of conversation going on about what constitutes good or bad teamwork, or what do we have to pay attention to. The second component in our solution is what we call the team assessment survey, which is our online, it's about a 50-item survey. It's designed to give teams benchmarking feedback against those 8 rocket model components. How is a team actually doing with mission? How is it doing with courage? How is it doing with results? And so teams can look at the survey results and say, gosh, it looks like we're doing pretty well on these 3 components, but these 2 components we're not doing well at all. And the other piece of nice feedback you get from the team assessment survey is, how does this team compare to teams across the globe? How do in one sense, you could either compare to teams in general, or you can benchmark against, here's how you compare against other C-suite teams. Here's how you compare against other HR leadership teams. Here's how you compare to other legal teams. So we've got 19 different benchmarking groups you can make comparisons against. But the idea here is model creates the common language. The team assessment survey helps teams have the right conversations.
Okay.
Here's what we're doing well. Here's what we're not doing well. We all agree on, yeah, we're all agree on that. And then the third component is, hey, what do we do about it? Because, I can get on a scale and be 30 pounds overweight. That's not necessarily going to cause me to lose weight, which is, it's kind of like the team assessment survey, sort of like the scale. We'll give you feedback about what's working and what's not working. The Ignition book says, okay, if you have a low score in mission, here's some activities you can do with the team to boost your score. If you have low score with norms, here's some activities you can do to boost your score. And those activities are not what I'm going to call touchy-feely activities. So these are activities that are field tested, and they really are designed to help teams do real work better.
Okay. And your books and resources are available through Amazon, right? Anybody
Yeah,
can pick
yeah,
those up. So all this stuff is
yeah,
out there. It's readily available for
yeah,
all you out
exactly.
there going, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And so then when we work with a team, like with the case study, we'll use these three components together. We'll use the model, we'll use the team assessment survey, and we'll use the activities from the book to help teams get to the next level of performance.
Okay. Beautiful. Perfect. Good. That's a good frame on which to tackle this. Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
So let's talk a little bit about a case study. And then I have all kinds of questions related to what have you seen as being sort of derailers within the sort of this system and all that. But
Yeah.
maybe we take an example and how you approached it, and
Yeah.
then
So this,
we can go from there.
yeah, I've worked with about 600. I've sort of designed and facilitated 600 senior team offsites. So, there's lots of stories I could tell. I'll narrow it down to one. This is with a division for a automotive OEM. So this company made parts for the automotive industry. Um, it was about a $12 billion division, or no, $12 billion company. This was about a $3 billion division. This was the European division for this company. I believe, if I remember right, it had something like 28 plants. A lot of these plants were co-located with some of the big car manufacturers
Yeah.
across Europe. And these parts were used in the assembly of these cars. This company had 40% market share, and they
Oh,
had
wow.
profit margins that were 3 times higher than everybody else.
Wow.
I mean,
Okay.
they were really doing well, except for the European division. The European division was just sucking wind. So the North America division was doing great. The Japanese division was great. The Chinese and Korean divisions were doing great. Europe was not doing well. And what was interesting about that is they had a long history of underperformance, 5 years worth. And they had gone through 3 division presidents in those 5 years. And
Okay.
nothing had changed in terms of its performance, not really. And so there was a major organizational reshuffling at the very top of the organization, but part of that caused them to hire a new president for this division, an external candidate that they hadn't had before. We ended up doing an executive assessment on the candidate, recommending him for the role. And then they asked us to say, okay, this division's been really underperforming. Can you help onboard this individual and help them turn things around?
Okay.
And in the team, what was really interesting, Tom, the team had 22 people on it of this European division, the leadership team, and
Wow.
those folks had stayed relatively unchanged. And so the division presidents had rotated in and out, but the 22 people underneath them had stayed relatively the same. And so Franz was coming in, he was the new division president, and they're all sitting there with their arms crossed saying, ah, this too shall pass. Let's give it just about 18 months and then, and then there'll be somebody
No,
new.
we'll rotate somebody
Yeah, we'll
out, right?
rotate them out. Yeah,
Yep.
we've seen
Yep.
it. We've been to this rodeo before, so we know what's going to happen here. And so, um, we got together with Franz and said, okay, here's what we'll do. So he knew this thing was really underperforming. And so we ended up kicking this off with a 2-day offsite with the 22 people each doing a half-hour presentation to everybody and to Franz and to us so they could see, okay, here's what we do, here's kind of what we're responsible for, here's what we're delivering. And it allowed him to get some sort of an initial read about what was going on with his team. Over the next 2 months, he ended up, doing a bunch of town halls. So he ended up doing his due diligence, going to these 28 plants, going to customers, trying, looking at the metrics, at the numbers, what the hell is going on here? What's happening in this division? At the same time, we took the 22 people and put them through one-day executive assessments.
Okay.
We said, okay, we're going to see who's got the right stuff here, Franz. We'll give you an independent evaluation. You're going to go out and do your evaluation in terms of what's going on the ground too. And then after 2 months, we got together and said, okay, Franz, here's what we got about the 22. Here's what he figured out and gathered from doing all of his due diligence. We put our heads together and we came back and said, okay, here's the new 8-person team. We're going to go from 22 to 8.
Mm-hmm.
6 of the 8 will be brand new. They're not even part of the 22.
Okay. All right.
So
much better number. Yep, we're getting there.
Much better
Yep.
number, but he completely cleaned house.
Yeah. Okay.
He basically said, look, and we agreed with it. We told him, hey, the team that got you there, the team that got you these results over the last 5 years, is not going to be the team to get you out of it.
Okay. Okay. Yep.
And so we did a number of other assessments for people lower in the organization that were supposedly superstars, and many of them were. We popped them into these new roles.
So brand new team. Looking back on it, on the 22, was there any area of sort of gaps, or were there any presenting issues or problems that were surfacing? Looking at that team, ultimately you got a new team, right? Okay, so I got that part of it. But was there anything out there that was showing up?
Well, part of it was the structure. A lot of it was that, this sort of thing was going on. There was
Okay.
Everybody was very focused on their respective silo. I'm just going to focus on my piece. I'm going to focus on my piece. There was no thought about, okay, what has to happen cross-functionally for us to actually be effective.
Okay, and then when you were, for those listening, you kind of did a crossover of your arms pointing at each other. No, that's okay. You were talking about was it a blaming culture, not really taking responsibility? Okay, got it. Yeah.
You completely blaming Tom and completely heads down.
Okay.
I have my short list of KPIs. I'm going to deliver on that, and I don't care what the rest of the organization does. And so what you'd end up having is like 4 or 5 people out of say 8 might do a really good job hitting their numbers, and the customer being really pissed off.
Yeah. Okay.
The customer I don't care if this was working, this was working, this was working. You need to deliver this stuff here, and it ain't happening. So and so they just had this real, their net promoter scores were horrible.
Okay.
Like I said, their financials were horrible, but because they had so much market share, they kind of could get away with it.
Yeah. So the complacency was seeping into there as well. There wasn't an urgency for change.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So then what ended up happening is now that we had the new team assembled, then we could start using the rocket model. So we taught everybody about the rocket model. Here's how we build a high-performing team. And then we started working on the components in the rocket model. How do we get everybody aligned on context, which is the situation? Let's make sure we're operating under the same set of assumptions about customers, about our suppliers, about governments, about our regulators. Here's what we think is going to happen over the next year. Here's the biggest challenges to this team and to the business over the next year. What are going to be our strategies for dealing with all of that? And then we started working on purpose. Why does this team exist? What is this unique value add? What is our North Star? What are we trying to accomplish over the next 5 years, or the next 3 years, the next 2 years? What are the key numbers we need to hit? What are our plans to try to make that happen? Who's doing what? And what are our priorities? And what are we going to start, getting rid of and not paying attention to? And how do we cut the clutter and say, this is what we're doing? And how do we get everybody on board with this? And then, we did some significant work around talent because we significantly changed the number of people on the team, the structure, the reporting structure, who was sitting in what seats, and, spending some time helping them get to know each other better and clarifying their roles. And we just started working up the model. And this happened in a series of quarterly meetings that happened for about 2 days, where one day was going to be spent doing business results and looking at operational and quality issues, and the next day was working on team improvement activities. But
Okay.
I will say, Tom, just to be clear, we didn't necessarily do one day doing this, do one day doing this. Many times it was interspersed. We may end up starting with doing usually we started doing a quarterly business review, and that would take a half a day. And then there might be two or three key issues that cropped up. And then what would happen, sometimes we'd end up doing some sort of a team improvement activity first to tee up the business conversation we needed to have around, okay, what are we going to do around this issue, around this customer, and how do we take, here's some stuff we just learned about how we work better together. How do we apply that then to this problem?
That makes good sense. So really you were blending the language, the ways of thinking about team dynamics into the actual work in this divisional quarterly meeting as you've described it. So you could, as I'm thinking about our leaders and listeners out there, they could really sort of think about what are the norms that we've established? How are the norms? How are we going to show up? And then how are we going to hold each other accountable to making sure that we stay focused on the things that matter as part of how they facilitate and deliver that 2 day offsite or whatever it is you have as your example. Am I hearing
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, that's really well said, Tom. Yeah, yeah, the best designs I've found have this blend of what I call task work and teamwork.
Perfect.
Here's the real business issues we got to crop that we have to deal with. Let's get those out on the table. And then how do we talk about some of the teamwork aspects to make sure that here's what we said we're going to do. Are we in fact doing it? Or what have we learned from this to make sure that the next conversation we have goes better?
Yeah. So what ultimately happened to that division?
So what was interesting is we ended up having the team, the original 22, take our team assessment survey. And it was part of Franz's onboarding process. So this was before he even showed up. It said, okay, hey, you guys take this survey so he could see it. What are you walking into? And the survey scores for the 8 components of the rocket model, people don't see it, but the component scores range from 0 to 100, with 50 being on par with other business unit leadership teams, lower scores being really ineffective, scores above 75 associated with high performing teams. That team, if I remember right, had 5 components of the 8 that had 0 scores.
Oh, wow.
And I think a couple were in single digits, and then one was 60. I think resources was 60. Everything else was either less than 10 or 0. And so they had what we call a TQ score, which is an overall team effectiveness score of 9, which kind of gives you a sense about what's this team's overall health. And again, that score ranged from 0 to 100, with 50 being average. So 9 is like, no matter what Gordy did, it would be effective. It's like, other than changing a president, because clearly that wasn't working. And so that was what we started with. And then we ended up, after 6 of these quarterly 2 day offsites, we ended up 18 months later doing a second team assessment survey. And if I remember right, their TQ score was in the 70s.
Oh, wow. Huge jump.
So huge jump, but more importantly, their operational performance, their quality performance, their customer net promoter scores, their financial performance, all saw huge improvements in performance. So it wasn't just, hey, we're all feeling better about each other. Aren't we feeling good? No, 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 no. The objective metrics also improved.
Yeah, and so in that in particular case, which is great, that's a great scenario. What if I don't have the ability to swap out my team where I've got 10, 12 people on my team? How would you approach it? And I know that we're just a group of individuals. We're really not functioning at a team. If you were to give some coaching and guidance to me as a leader with that scenario, that situation, what would you suggest that I zero in on? How could I take this model and put it into sort of a very workable for even my
Yeah,
team that I've got, where I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
have some of those capabilities that you talked about around
Yeah.
swapping
So there's,
people?
yeah, the couple of things you can do. So one is I would recommend probably buying our Ignition book. There's a book called Ignition, A Guide to Building High Performing Teams. You can buy it on Amazon. I think the hard copy is like $50. The electronic copy is about $6. The first couple of chapters just talk about the rocket model, our general approach or framework for building high performing teams. And once you understand the rocket model, you can probably diagnose your team and say, okay, what do I think is going on here? Do I think we're on the same page about context? Do I think are we pretty clear about how we win, which is the mission piece? You can start doing your own diagnostic. And then the rest of the book talks about, okay, if you have low scores in these areas, here's specifically what you do with the team to improve those scores. And so it's got these 40 team improvement activities linked to the different 8 rocket model components. And it gives you, here's step-by-step instructions about what you do with a team. Here's how much time it's going to take. Here's what the room needs to look like. Here's the materials you need. And then our website, www.therocketmodelforteams, you can download the PowerPoints, the forms, the handles, the articles, all needed to facilitate those activities. Um, if you want to get a little bit more sophisticated, rather than doing your own diagnosis of the team, you can have your team do the team assessment survey. Now you'll have the team fill out what's going on, and you'll be able to get benchmarking feedback about how does this team compare to other teams. In our most recent version of the team assessment survey also gathers customer feedback.
Oh,
So
interesting.
how are customers feeling about what the team is producing? So, the team can sit down and say, okay, here's how we think we're doing around context. Here's how we think we're doing around mission, around resources, around courage. And this is what our customers are saying about what we're actually producing and whether or not they're happy with what they're getting.
That's fascinating. So really, what I really appreciate your model, and we're using this model as well now, is the understanding of the context. In that particular case, you have some feedback from the context, this being customers, for which to team to get a sense of what's really going on out there. How do they see us? Do they see us as effective as we see ourselves? Is a
Well,
great
yeah,
way to think it.
because I see this a lot with particularly HR teams. So when I work with HR teams, I work with lots and lots of HR teams. A lot of times, HR has got a pretty clear sense about why we're there. I mean, the purpose is clear, and the purpose oftentimes is quite noble. It's like, yeah, we want to help employees, we want to help the company from a people perspective. But where it breaks down a lot of times is having some very clear deliverables and goals. How does the HR organization actually define winning? What does it need to do to win? And what ends up happening is I see a lot of HR folks working really hard. So they're putting lots and lots of hours in. The question is whether or not it moves the needle. So there, many times I work with HR folks, they confuse activity with productivity because they don't have clearly defined goals. They haven't clearly defined here's how we would win or succeed. You're not sure if those efforts are really accretive to the organization, helping the larger organization get to where it's trying to go.
That and I see that a lot. And they just keep adding on more activities
Yeah.
and really not hitting the results that matter the most. And so what
Yep.
you're seeing with this is, I would assume that you've done the studies that there is a correlation to the TQ score under results with the actual performance results. So the real results of the organization, division, or team.
Yeah. 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 Although it's hard, it's actually quite hard to do that research, believe it or not. Um, and the reason I say that, so I'm not trying to shirk my research
No,
responsibilities.
not at all. No.
But you think about it, Tom, like because I know you've got this deep expertise in sales. Just think about sales team A and looking at how this sales team is actually performing and looking at its, real tangible outcomes versus looking at a product development team, all right, looking at a operational team. Each of them have very different metrics they're driving to. Each of them measure performance really differently. And so, how do you end up saying, okay, well, here's the scores on this. How does this relate to my objective performance? But that looks really different depending upon the kind of team you're talking about.
Yes.
Because frankly, if I had that figured out, I'd be sitting on the beach somewhere in the Caribbean drinking margaritas because I wouldn't be working anymore. Gordy's got it figured out. So
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And even when you look at the performance of the team from some of these metrics that we look at, but we all agree, particularly since I've been in sales for my whole life, is that upstream indicators, kind of those leading indicators that are correlated to the lagging indicators, which is results, sort of you got to look at that as being okay, even if it's just anecdotally, that we've changed the system within our team and these are the results that we're getting. Plus, it might be just more enjoyable to be part of the team, which, for a lot of people, that's an important aspect,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
just think about an organization, and you've seen this, Tom, working with sales teams.
Yeah.
You've got some organization that's selling a hot product or service. They can't make money fast enough.
Right.
Some industries, you and I were working with during COVID, if you were working in the outdoor industry, if you were selling ATVs or athletic gear or camping gear during COVID, you couldn't print money fast enough.
Yeah.
And then, guess what? Everybody bought all the ATVs, all the running shoes, all the camping gear they wanted, all the Winnebagos and RVs they wanted by 2023. And then you see sales just go through the floor and it's like, what? It's like, well, everybody's got what they want. There's no reason to buy anymore. So,
Yeah.
so there are times when where you look at performance and it has really a little to do with the team. You're selling a dog product or you're selling a great product, and so it's not a perfect correlation
Yeah.
by any
Yeah.
stretch of the imagination.
Which I know you place a lot of emphasis on context, which really you got to look at the context, the
Yeah,
markets, the
yeah,
competition,
yeah,
where do you fall as far as market share? You have to look at that to make this or any business strategy relevant, right? You
yeah,
have to
yeah.
factor in context. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think, and what's weird is that most team models don't say anything about context.
Yes,
So
it's
if you
true.
think about the Tuckman model, the forming, storming, norming, performing, the one we all learned, where is context in that? The Lencioni model, you're starting with trust, and then you go to the commitments. Like, where's context in any of it? So to me, context is just fundamental. When you think about um, a Navy SEAL team doing a mission over in Africa, I got to spend a ton of time getting aligned on the context. What's the situation? Where are we going to be? Um, Business teams don't do that very much, and I think I think it really interferes with teams performing where they could.
Yes, so well said. So well said. Our last speaker was talking about the importance of external benchmarking as well as internal benchmarking, looking at trends, macro trends, geopolitical, global shifts,
Absolutely.
competition, all of that plays out. So you've got to look at this. As we sort of wrap this up, Gordy, this has been great. I'm a leader out there and I've got a team that I'm leading. Where are some common derailment areas that you see? Because some of them are going to be more pronounced than others. Do you see some patterns with some of the teams you've worked with?
Oh boy. Well, I don't know if it's a pattern, but it certainly is an issue I see with lots of teams. So with lots of teams, they have a hard time figuring out how inclusive should people be. What I mean by that, Tom, is you've got an issue cropping up, and is this issue involve everybody on the team, or is it better to let a subset of people on the team handle that issue? Is that a more efficient and effective use of resources? And this happens a lot with senior teams. So I spend a lot of time on this issue because what ends up happening is, depending on the organization, depending on the team, there is this huge level of FOMO. If I'm not involved with it, then it can't be any good. And what ends up happening at teams at the top is they're populated with what I call alpha males and females. Everybody at the top's an alpha male or female. That's how they got there. And so I don't care how irrelevant a topic is to somebody's expertise. By God, the rest of the team needs to hear my opinion. And many times that gets in the way. And this is happening is when you're running a senior team meeting and half the people are on their damn phones or on their laptops. They're just checked out. They're kind of multitasking, but they're really not there. And when you have that going on, it means that you're talking about an issue that really doesn't pertain to everybody. And the CEO or the president is suffering from the disease of inclusivity. We have to have everybody involved. And so one of the things I end up doing with senior teams a lot is helping them understand what are the topics by which individuals or subsets of teams should work on, and which are the ones in which the whole team's got to align. And so and let's be clear, let's be explicit here. When these issues crop up, this is a Tom and Kathy and Christy issue. This is not the whole team issue. These sorts of issues we want these folks to handle. And we're very explicit about it. So when they're off working on this, the rest of us aren't wondering, okay, what are they doing? What are they up to? I need to go in and I got to find out what's happening there. No. So one of the things we kind of work out with senior teams is what are the topics that we all have to be aligned on? What are the ones that are better done by individuals or subsets of folks?
Okay.
And teaching them how to make those calls before they even get into the problem solving mode. Because if they get some of these over here that are individual or handled by subsets, it's really easy for the team to start everybody weighing in. It's not an efficient use of time. And as a matter of fact, the people who are close to the problem get kind of pissed off because they're getting all these inputs about people who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just pulls the whole system down, the whole team
Yeah.
system down as far as ability to be agile, which was our last speaker talked about the importance of that and agility and courage
Yeah.
being critical. Yeah. Yeah. This has been interesting. Is there anything that maybe we've not touched on, Gordy, that you think would be important for our listeners to know as they look and evaluate their teams around team leadership?
Yeah, I think one thing that strikes me, Tom, is that only 1 in 5 teams are high performing. So the research is really clear about this. Now, I will be the first one to say that not every team needs to be high performing. Getting to become a high performing team takes a lot of energy and effort and a lot of fortitude on a leader's part. And there are lots of teams where the juice is not worth the squeeze. It's
Okay.
it's not worth spending all the time in it. If they're performing okay, that might be good enough. That might be good enough. All right. But I think 80% of teams could probably improve.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, 20%, but there's not a lot you can do there. It might be tweaking, which is great, but the vast majority of teams probably need some level of improvement. Some need a lot, some need a little. What's really interesting though, so when I get in a room with 20 leaders and I'll say, okay, look, the research shows that only 4 of you are leading a high performing team because only 1 in 5 are leading a high performing team. So only 4 of you leading a high performing team. I guarantee you 16 people are thinking, I have one of those teams. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I have one of those teams. There is a big disconnect between what leaders think is going on with the team and what the team thinks is going on with the team. Because one of the things we have at our team assessment survey is we can look to see how did the leader rate the team's performance and how did the teams rate the team's performance. And it's a 1 to 5 scale. And oftentimes leaders have a point to a point and a half point higher across the board. And so I think leaders many times have this very mistaken idea that, oh yeah, I'm leading a high performing team. Yeah, the team may not feel that way. And there's a pretty good chance the team does not feel that way. So until you get some benchmarking data, you're not going to know. But to me, that is the single biggest barrier to effective teamwork in organizations.
Is leaders believing that they have better performing teams than in reality? It's kind of
Yeah,
a denial thing.
yeah, because
Yeah.
if I'm already good at it, what the hell do I need to have why do I
Yeah.
have to
There's
get
no
any
urgency.
feedback? Why do
Yeah.
I have to work on
Yeah. Yeah.
it?
Totally.
That to me is what ends up happening. So um, collect the data,
Yeah.
validate your perception. You might be bang on, but
Yeah.
there's a pretty good chance that you're not.
Yeah. Okay. So I have 3 questions for you as we wrap this up, Gordy.
Yeah.
So do you have any particular favorite quote, either from a contemporary leader or a historical, that really has spoken to you over the years? Does anyone come to mind?
Huh. Boy. In our textbook, we must have 500 quotes. I'm trying,
I've
listen,
seen your book. I've read your.
we've got lots and lots of quotes, and I'm trying to think of one. And I don't know who said it, but
Okay.
I do think, I use it a lot. I do think leadership is a team sport. And that's my quote, because I think a lot of people forget that. A lot of the focus is on the leader. It's like, no, it's a team sport. If you don't have a team, you're not going to lead.
Yeah. That's so well said. So well said. How about if you were to if you're a team leader, you're working with say a young, brand new emerging leader out there that's got a team. If there was, aside from the Ignition book, great
Yeah.
leadership book, is there another leadership book that you would recommend that they take on their next vacation? Well, maybe not on their vacation, on the next flight. So,
It depends on what kind of vacations you take.
yeah,
I'd probably bring a book like that on my vacation.
I know. I hate to say I probably would too, but
Yeah,
anyway.
I think a real classic is the Tehran, Drotter, and Noel book on the leadership pipeline.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yes.
that book's been around for what, 25 years now. And I think it's a classic. And I believe, Tom, in the last 3 or 4 years, they've updated, there's a new version out. I think the first version came out maybe in 2001, something like that. Then they had one come out in 2010. And I think they've updated it recently. But that is just such a good book for saying, gosh, if you're in an individual contributor role, what do you need to be focusing on? Where should you be spending your time? And then as you transition to this leadership role, what changes? And
Yes.
and it's the whole notion that you can't keep doing what you were doing, only more of it, and be successful in this next role as you get promoted. So I just think they've done a nice job mapping out, how things change as people take on more responsibilities and they move through an organization.
Okay. We'll include the title of that book and a link in the show notes. That's a great suggestion. This has been great, Gordy. How do people get a hold of you? How would be the best way to go?
Yeah, yeah. Well, reach out on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I have a email address is Curphy Consulting, Curphy. So it's just like Murphy with a C instead of an M. It's the Welsh spelling.
Okay. Yep.
Curphy Consulting, one word, at msn.com. Um, or you can always check out our website. Our team website is www.rocketmodelforteams.com. And
Beautiful.
there you can download our white paper on our approach. You can see what the rocket model is all about, the team assessment survey. Here's some stuff from Ignition, all the facilitator support materials, case studies, all kinds of stuff there about what we do with teams.
Beautiful. And you have tons of resources on your site, and you have that abundant mindset of wanting people to check it out. We're all
Yeah,
in this game, which is why I invited you, that we're all trying to become better at this leadership game. So
yeah.
thank you, Gordy. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I wish you the best in your endeavors to change the world through more effective teams.
Yeah, thank you. No,
So
thank Tom, thank you for having me.
all right, that is a wrap for this episode. Hey, a big thank you goes out to Gordy for sharing some of his knowledge, his best practices, and particularly his some of the tools that he's developed with his firm to help us all become better, more effective leaders. We started the conversation with a macro view of what's going on out there in the business world. What's the landscape? What are some of the changes and trends going on that is leading organizations to focus more on teamwork? And then we took a look at a case study where he had applied some of his tools and frameworks and structure to actually help a real team take it to the next level. We then zeroed in very pragmatically on his team effectiveness model, which is known as the rocket model, kind of thinking about that as a metaphor for all the various pieces that need to be part of that rocket to be able to launch successfully and accomplish the mission. The 8 components that we covered, I will unpack for you real quickly here, but they're also summarized in the show notes. There are 8 interrelated components that need to be in place. Number 1, context. He really underscored the importance of understanding what's the context that the team is being called to navigate within. What's the landscape, the conditions, the situation that the team is operating within. Number 2, is the mission clear? Do we have a clear why, what, and how? Are people clear on what are those achievable results that we need to accomplish? Is that all clear and everybody on the same, are we all in the same plane going in the same destination? He then talked about number three, talent. Do we have the right skill sets and experience, diversity of talent within the team to be able to accomplish our mission? Those three consider to be foundational. They've got to be in place. Context, understanding of what the situation is. Number two, mission, is it clear? Number three, do we have the right people in the right roles? He then talked about number four, which is norms. Do we have the right operating guidelines? Do we have the right operating system established within our teams? And is it clear around behavioral expectations? How do we come together? How do we deal with disagreements? How do we show up and stay engaged? Number five was buy-in. Do we have a commitment and an engagement level on the part of each team member? And are we all sort of committed towards success as a team? Number six, he talked about the importance of resources, getting really a good understanding. Do we have the right authority to make decisions? Do we have the right data? Do we have the right software to be able to navigate well? Number seven, talked about courage, even though it's kind of moving up on the rocket levels, kind of the stages of the rockets or the levels, as courage is being really about fostering trust. It's talking about cohesion, team cohesion, and do we have a level of psychological safety where we can bring issues up and deal with disagreements in an open way that's not grounded in fear of creating tension? That how do we lean into some of that and cultivate a culture of courage? And then number eight, results. Are we tracking and celebrating progress along the way? And do we have dashboards and performance metrics that help us keep that motivation going as we move towards that mission? My final takeaway was this, and he underscored that, this requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of intentionality and to not rely just upon your team getting to performance level by pulling a bunch of smart people together. And so it does require work on our part. And so maybe all your teams don't all need to be high performing. It might be a strategic move for you to step back and say which ones truly do need to be high performing. And I'm going to go invest and really put the energy, time, and resources to that particular team. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're so inclined, leave us a rating. And that does help others find this particular podcast. Leadership isn't easy, and yet it's one of the most rewarding challenges that we take on, whether within our organizations, our teams, our families, our communities. And as leaders, we set the tone. We do bring the weather. We know that, right? And it does matter how we show up each and every day. And so my challenge to all of you is to go out with that courage, go out and lead with authenticity, and of course, humility. Until next time, stay in touch, and thanks for listening.